Thank you so much for joining me today for this conversation. We are really grateful for your time today. I thought I would start with a really general get to know you question before we dive into your leadership at the commission. And preparing for the conversation, I went back and listened to your remarks at the 2019 Georgia Climate Conference.
Oh, okay.
And you were introduced on the main stage as, and I'll quote, probably the best example of a Renaissance man you will ever meet.
I didn't say that.
So before we talk about your great work at the Atlanta Regional Commission, I was hoping you could just tell us a little bit more about yourself and the path you took to leading the commission.
I am a Georgia native, born in Southwest Georgia, Moultrie, but I grew up in Cincinnati, Ohio. Came back down to Georgia to go to school at Georgia Tech. Met my wife at Georgia Tech, have lived in Atlanta, worked in Atlanta since 1972. Trained as a mechanical engineer, started my career with Georgia Power Company. And interestingly enough, for about 3 or 4 years before I left the company, I was the alternate energy technology policy analyst, along with my full-time job as a design engineer and later on as a project manager. So I got exposed to and learned a lot about alternative energy technologies then, and have kept up a life of learning and loving the possibilities of us getting to a non-carbon future, or at least a much lower carbon future. I am trained as an engineer, as I tell people, but I have the heart and soul of a musician. Played a lot of instruments in high school, and have continued, or actually resumed playing one late in life. That was my favorite, the oboe. That's a little bit about me.
Well, I saw that you've led the Atlanta Regional Commission since 2011. You guys do a ton of interesting work, but for those that aren't familiar with the work of the commission, can you describe the organization and what it does?
I think the simplest description of the Atlanta Regional Commission is we are a table, an organizational vehicle through which local elected officials in the 10, soon to be 11 county Atlanta region can come and talk about possibilities for how we grow and thrive together in the future. And that includes conversations with their partners from the private sector, the philanthropic sector, the nonprofit sector. We have a very broad portfolio of activity. We do long range planning and transportation, in water supply management, in we coordinate aging services or services for older adults and disabled adults in the 10 county region. We do workforce development training. We do homeland security coordination for several of the core jurisdictions in the region.
The work of the commission, as you started to kind of give us a high level overview, it intersects with this lens of climate change in so many ways, from building resilience to the impacts of a changing climate to actually reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And since Drawdown Georgia is really focused on how we can reduce emissions in the state, I thought we could start there. Maybe tell us a little bit about how the commission supports climate-friendly transportation like mass transit or biking or pedestrian options. That really ties directly back to some of the solutions in Drawdown Georgia.
Absolutely. Part of our role as the long-range transportation planner is to try to help craft strategies that get people out of being single-occupant vehicle drivers. We have both operational things as well as planning and infrastructure role. In the operational side, we run a service, our mobility services group. We run a suite of services that helps employers and employees look for alternative ways of commuting to work, including, by the way, telework. So we had our biggest single experiment and our huge amount of growth because of the pandemic. And companies were calling us, and I say companies, organizations, because they're not only for-profit, but also nonprofit and governmental, were calling us for technical consultation and getting programs set up or getting their programs more widely spread if they already had a program. So that's a huge amount of work that we do. And then in the long range planning area, in addition to roads and highways and bridges, the typical kinds of things we have to plan for, we do a lot of the planning for mass transit, as well as bicycle and pedestrian trails. And in fact, we have a regional trails plan that we adopted, that the commission board adopted about 2 years ago. It was a major update, and it looks now that we hope that within the next 7 to 10 years, it will have a regionally connected trail system, one of the one of the widest and largest regional trail systems in the nation, if we can see all the projects that is anticipated into fruition. So we're very hopeful about that. And with the new emphasis in Congress on expanding transportation alternative funds, specifically those funds that help to slow down or reduce greenhouse gas emissions, we have hope that there's going to be a lot more federal funding injected into trail planning and expansion. So we're very hopeful for that. What we have done is slow down the outgrowth of the Atlanta region. So now we have in suburban and urban areas within the region these smaller but very significant concentrations of urban mixed-use development all around the region, north, south, east, and west. And that program that we began in 1999 is actually as an experiment. It was a first in the nation. It's become award-winning and it's extremely competitive. And so it's not directly vehicle related, but the pattern between vehicles and land uses, which is inexorably the two are tied together, that has really slowed down the growth in the number of trips and made those trips shorter trips. And so in a small way, that's also helped us to try to attack growth in greenhouse gases.
I know some of your work also really touches on this idea of resilience.
Yep.
How can we make infrastructure in the built environment more resilient to a changing climate? So I'm curious, what kind of programs you guys are working on in that space and what kind of impacts are top of mind?
Under my tenure, we've always preached trying to be interdisciplinary in our approaches to work. And so I always encourage my colleagues, let's look for opportunities to work together to meet mutual needs, because a community is not just transportation. It's not just natural resources. It's not just workforce. It's not just aging. A community is a complex stew of all those things and even more, right? And so we started our resilience work probably aggressively about 4 years ago. And 3 years ago, our transportation planning teams and our modeling teams, working with our natural resources team and our stormwater experts, developed models by which we can project based upon past rainfall patterns and future weather and climate predictions. We can project where the worst rainfall is going to cause the most problems, whether that's flooding, whether that's wiping out or causing problems, eroding infrastructure, either the land underneath the road surfaces themselves, and things of that nature. And now, as a result of that, as a part of each of our transportation planning grants, not each, but as a part of our planning grant cycle, we encourage and we incentivize projects that can show a large element of resiliency in the design and implementation. And it's the kind of thing that everyday people wouldn't think about. It's the kinds of things that can make systemic change over long periods of time, which is we feel is probably our most important role.
That's great. One thing I've spoken to some of your colleagues about and read a little bit more before this conversation was your climate conscious communities. Can you tell us a little bit more about that program and how it works?
Sure. We actually started this program out about 11 years ago as green communities, and we were trying to encourage and incentivize local governments to think more holistically about sustainability. Sustainability isn't just a building kind of a thing. The whole community can get engaged in it, and we want local governments to be the champions and the voice for pushing sustainability efforts within their communities. And we didn't have money to give out. It was all done through a manual suite of guidelines for best practices that we learned from other governments, from environmental nonprofits that helped us develop the whole guideline series. And what we were leveraging is that local communities have a pride, and they have a pride and local elected leaders have a pride, and they have a little friendly competition. And when one of them gets a good designation, another one wants to find a way to get that same designation, you know. And so we were trying to leverage that kind of soft competitive spirit that they have through this program, and it's worked. And so we have green county certified, we have green certified counties, we have green community certified cities, and we have several that are up for RIA certification, because we require recertification that they're either staying at their level or exceeding it. In the last 3 years, the team started talking about, we really need to turn this from just green communities and think more about educating people on climate change and what kinds of strategies can they do in their communities to begin to help to do their part on an individual or collective basis in small ways to attack climate change. We're very excited that it's actually been well received in a lot of communities through their planning directors, their transportation directors, or their city councils have expressed more interest in this program. So we're thinking, again, trying to set a tone for a long-term change in a collective way.
Yeah, that's great. I think this whole concept of beneficial competition can be really powerful.
Yeah. And there's nothing like watching a mayor who comes into a conversation with a couple other mayors and says, hi guys, guess what? We just got this, you know, and then the others like, well, where, how did you get that? We want to get that. I've heard about that, you know. It's fun to watch them in the friendly, competitive way that's constructive, right? It's not destructive, it's constructive. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
So we've talked a little bit about opportunities that you either seized or created to try to like move this forward, but I'm curious if you can talk about some of the challenges you face in trying to make our infrastructure more climate friendly and to both build resilience and reduce emissions.
The first and for me, always the biggest challenge in a democracy, which we obviously live in, is political will. You know, I forgot who is it that said that change moves at the speed of trust. And so a lot of political leaders, primarily elected leaders, um, have to believe that there's one, that their constituents want it, and that enough of their constituents want it, that if they decide to try to propose a policy or move that direction, they're not going to experience some huge backlash politically because of it. You know, frankly, they like their job, they want to keep their job, they try to be safe. So political will is the first thing. And very often what we can serve to do through our research, through our polling, through best practices, we can show mayors that there's probably a larger reservoir of interest and will in a certain type of change that they aren't aware of or don't really believe or didn't really understand that exists to enough extent that they can begin to embrace it and be safe in leading their community that way. So that's one thing. The other thing is always funding. I don't care what you say, you know, governments have limited resources, you know, and that's because we have limited resources to give to them. So there's only so much we're going to give to them, only so much we're going to allow them to tax us. And so there's only so much they have. And the problem, the possibility, the challenge of governing is trying to balance all the competing needs in communities with the resources that you have. And so to the extent that people are willing to impose more fees upon themselves in order to pay more for resilient infrastructure, for climate change approaches, or are willing to change their business models. So maybe we think differently about how we're creating the revenues and where the revenue sources are coming from. That's another way I think we can get some change. But those are systems changes. So first, political will. Second is revenue, and third is systems change to get people to realize there's different ways of approaching either paying for things or disincentivizing some things too as well, right? So you want to incentivize what you think is healthier, you know, climate conscious kind of infrastructure, and you want to disincentivize the things that maybe traditionally in the past we thought were wonderful that we now know through a lot of research and science are not so wonderful, right? So we don't need more roads, we don't need more highways, we don't need more concrete per se. We need to better manage and leverage what we do have in place, and then find other things to do besides that. So
you've announced that you are going to retire from the Atlanta Regional Commission next year.
Yes, ma'am. Mhm.
I know a lot of people have asked you to, look back on your time leading the organization and comment on what you're most proud of. But I thought we'd mix it up just a little bit. And I'd ask you what you're most proud of when it comes to how ARC has advanced climate mitigation and resilience since 2011.
I guess what I'm most proud of is that we have not allowed ourselves as a staff to be stymied in our ability to work and innovate because of a lack of political consensus on our board about climate issues. When I started this job in 2011, late 2011, 2012, we honestly, if we had asked our board to embrace climate change, global warming, and begin to address policies, then it would have been a dogfight. And so we just recognize political reality. Okay, they're not ready to do that. We're not going to ask them to do something that they might feel stressed, tense, embarrassed, or whatever about. But that doesn't mean we can't stop doing our work that way. And that was what coming to the realization that as the leader of a very competent, caring, and compassionate staff, there was a lot of things that we could do technically, even before policies were formally changed, that begin to change our work in the way we use within the policies that we do have, adapting our work. I am very happy that we were able to do a number of things and have been able to do a number of things and continue to pioneer a number of things, even before there was the political will to adopt that perspective. And now that the political will has changed and we're able to talk about it openly with the board, that just means we can move a little bit faster. But so, in that regard, yeah, I'm very proud of many of the things we've done.
Well, that's great. And I really appreciate your time and for sharing your insights today and for serving on the Drawdown Georgia Leadership Council. We're really grateful.
Well, thank you for having me, and thank you for the honor of serving. I appreciate it.